All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. This evening we have with us Jake Bond from GSC Investments. He was generous enough to share his time with us on this topic that is near and dear to his heart. Affordable housing is, at the end of the day, the real driver of this industry. It's the product that we are investing in and offering American families. So we want to touch on that and give you a little color on the other structural drivers that make this such an interesting asset class that benefits not only us as investors and operators, but certainly benefits American tenants as well with affordable housing that is in desperate need. So with that, we'll jump in and let us start with this fun language here for disclosure purposes. And let's get into quick bios here. We have Brad and Jake here on the presentation. We also have Ian Fisher with Vintage Capital, who will be helping us with some questions at the end, which you can type in at any time, and we'll address those when we wrap up here. Real quick on me, I am the CIO of Vintage Capital, also a managing partner of Evergreen Capital, which is a registered investment advisor that advises Vintage on its investments. My background is in real estate private equity, both on the buy and sell side, working for Eastfield Secured before I went off and assembled a portfolio of mobile home parks as an operator and sold that portfolio in 2020 and 2021, and have been investing as a limited partner and a minority GP with operators such as Jake at GSC for about 7 years now. And Jake, you want to give us your background here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brad. We purchased our first community in the fall of 2016. It was a 100-lot community in Farmington, New Mexico. It was a great opportunity, also a great experience for us. I think that we had probably a lot of common misconceptions about the industry and the asset class itself. Since 2016, we've grown the portfolio to over 40 communities, roughly 4,000 lots. And we've had the good fortune, and sometimes I would say the misery, of also developing 2 new communities, which has been a lot of fun, definitely a very steep learning curve. But as it relates to providing affordable housing, you're going to learn a lot. You're really going to have to jump into the weeds and get your hands dirty, so to speak, in order to occupy what we have is 300 plus vacant lots. So we had done some value add stuff here and there where we were, infilling some communities, but this has been a great experience, and I think has really made us a stronger operator.
Indeed. Thanks, Jake. So when it comes to manufactured housing, one of the main benefits of it is just that delta between what the all-in payment is for a tenant in one of our parks, one of our investments, versus what they would be spending in either an apartment or in a stick-built home. And the real problem in America is that there's just not enough affordable housing, given how stretched everybody is on their monthly paycheck. 57% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and aren't able to save money and aren't able to get that 20% down payment, many of them, to go ahead and buy that single family home. And even if they could get that 20% down payment, they are having a hard time with the 6-7% interest rates. And then you add property taxes, you add the increasing cost of home insurance, especially given the weather events that we've been having. And there's just not a lot left at the end of the day. And that is especially true for retirees as well, those that are on fixed income. The median retirement savings for a 65-year-old shy of $200,000. And if you can imagine trying to make that last for 20 plus years, with people living longer and advances in medicine, could be longer than that, is not real possible. That's $7,000 a year if you're doing the standard 4% withdrawal rate. You add on Social Security, you're getting to that $25,000 a year. Obviously not much to live on. And then even worse, if you just think about all the Americans that are not already retired, you have zero savings. So we have a retirement crisis in the country. We need to be able to provide affordable living to a lot more people as the country continues to grow, continues to see net migration from immigration. We just don't have enough affordable housing affordable homes for these people. And so Jake and I will talk about on this slide, what does that delta look like, and why is manufactured housing, why is it such a tremendous value? It starts with the absolute cost of the home up front. So this 121,000 number is an average between double wides and single wides, brand new. And of course, this ranges pretty wildly across the country. You can see a 250,000, 300,000 all in double wide, and maybe the Pacific Northwest, it has a garage attached to it. And then you can, of course, get 70,000, 70, 80,000 single wide that is built with decent materials, but is an affordable product at the other side of the spectrum. And so then you have, if the tenant's able to pay for the house outright, that 121,000, which a surprising amount of retirees do this. They sell their $500,000 home, their $400,000 home, and then they go ahead and they buy a double wide outright, and then just pay because they want to keep their living expenses, their monthly expenses low, and then they just would be paying the lot rent every month. This $854 monthly cost would include the lot rent and some incidental items for that mobile home like insurance. But obviously that's a heck of a discount versus if you had to put 20% down on a brand new single family home costing $500,000. So you've taken your $100K, which would have bought you 80%, almost a whole mobile home, but you took that $100K, you put in your down payment, and now your monthly mortgage payment is $2,600. If you include property taxes, insurance, maintenance, then you're looking more like $3,400 all in per month, which is a heck of a delta versus somebody that was able to buy the manufactured home outright. So this has become a de facto retirement strategy for a lot of people in order to get their costs as low as possible on a monthly basis.
Other thing I'd add to that, Brad, from an affordability standpoint, for a large majority of the seniors or retirees, they're buying new homes in our communities. There's also a sense of comfort that they have a greater degree of confidence that there's not going to be a large unexpected expense that comes up. A lot of the single family homes that they may be living in today are 30, 40, 50 years old. They have the original roof intact. They have, my father, for example, my parents built a home in 1986, nice home, has the original furnace in it. That furnace is turning 40 soon. They don't make furnaces like that anymore. Average life expectancy of a furnace today is 10 years. And my dad has the same roof on that particular home as they installed when they built it. And so we get a lot of people that come to us that say, hey, you know what? Not only is this more affordable, but it eliminates that large unexpected expense that I may not be able to afford in the future. And I don't want that looming over my head.
Totally. Yeah, just the bigger your home, the more things go wrong. That means the bigger the roof. That means the bigger the flooring. If you have a water leak, I had a giant water leak when I bought my house, and that was a $15,000 surprise. Whereas in a mobile home, you're not ripping out, you're not getting into the foundation. You're absolutely right. A lot fewer things can go wrong with a mobile home. That, at least from an affordability standpoint, it's not going to break your bank to do a small repair. So moving on to the rental side of the equation here, if somebody doesn't have the money to buy the mobile home outright and say they just wanted to rent it, you still have that dramatic delta between your alternative options, whether that be renting a single family house or an apartment building. You have that, call it 50% cost savings on a square foot basis, right? Because you tend to get a larger mobile home than an equivalent apartment building, which is nice, which is a ton of people. There's a subset of people that are just never going to live in apartments. They just don't want to have people on all three sides of them, four even, right? So they want space. They want to be able to park the car in a driveway. They want to be able to have a little garden. They don't want to share walls with other families. And they can do that at a big discount to most apartment buildings today. And so when I look at a new investment, a new market, I'm always comparing the all-in lot rent plus utilities versus what a 2 or 3 bedroom. Typically, I like 3 bedroom just because most of the parks that I'm looking at they tend to be all ages, not 55 plus. So you want to have 3 bedrooms because you want the kids to have a bedroom as well. And you look at that delta, and in the best markets, that delta is huge. And so that's what I think about the competition. I actually don't think that comparing lot rents to various parks in a 100% occupied market is all that relevant, really, because you know where the finish line is. The finish line on lot rents is going to be closer to that 3-bedroom apartment rent than it is the property 2 blocks away that Pop has owned for 30 years and has artificially kept lot rents too low. That's not a very good comp. The better comp, that knowing what your future looks like when you go to buy a park, is looking at this concept of an all-in cost to own or buy a single family home, or the equivalent 3-bedroom rental. Is tends to how I think about it. And I know you think about it, Jake, in a similar manner. At least you certainly did with our Montana deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is another side of that, right? Sometimes, especially in more densely populated markets where the housing market has really gone bonkers, you can have a market that's 100% occupied with a handful of outliers, meaning you might have 1 or 2 communities that have really pushed lot rents. And so it's sometimes difficult to understand what the true market rent should be, because you can have people on both sides of it. You can have people where lot rents are just well below what they should be, and that's great for the residents, right? And the alternative is you could have lot rents that are way higher than they should be and have actually pushed past that inflection point relative to the cost of alternatives and what's creating value for the tenants. I think the reason that manufactured housing is such a great solution for affordability, and I've had a lot of conversations with various housing authorities about this, and one of the things that the housing authorities are frustrated with is that they've made a large investment into thousands and thousands of apartment units, right? And the low income affordable housing apartments are meant to be a stepping stone. A lot of people simply get trapped inside of them and they're never able to move on to the next step. And what's challenging about that is if they are in that unit for 30 years, at the end of the 30 years, they don't have anything to show for it. If you compare that to manufactured housing, now, of course, there's some maintenance needs to be done to the home, right? It can't be falling apart. It can't have water damage. But there are things that you need to do that you might not have to do in an apartment. Are they major? No. But there are some responsibilities and some costs relative to maintaining the home. If you're able to do that at the end of that 30-year period, not only are you going to end up better off because your all-in cost was lower as compared to the apartments, but you're going to have something to show for it in the end. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and that is definitely not appreciated for plenty of owners in the Southeast, where that dynamic is not as prevalent as your markets in the Pacific Northwest. I know you guys are expanding too, but yeah, in a lot of Southeastern markets, you don't see that appreciation characteristic, but it is inching that direction for sure. Because really, what we're talking about is the best way I can demonstrate it is if you think about the homes in rent-controlled markets in California, where the actual home itself will sell for a mobile home will sell for $1.5 million, right? In some parts, because the fact that the lot rent is artificially constrained, is artificially low, the value of that low lot rent is accruing to the actual owner of the mobile home. And so that is true. And as Jake has mentioned, in markets where people are raising lot rents responsibly, they're not sending them to the moon, and demand is high for affordable housing, that appreciation can actually accrue to the tenant, which is a wonderful thing. I think mobile home park operators would all be better off if they allowed tenants to really enjoy some of that appreciation as well, because they're going to be stickier tenants. They're going to take care of the homes better. It fits the dream of what everybody wants in the industry on both sides of that equation.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also just relative to lack of options, right?
Totally.
When costs are high, there's going to be demand for lower cost options. And it's that demand, what you referenced with regards to some of the California markets where there's rent control and the costs are artificially low. That's what creates the demand. And that demand is what creates the value for the homeowner in the end.
Sure. And actually, I forgot, just to touch on that, like really, and I think Jake feels the same way I do about this space, is that the opportunity in mobile home parks is not, hey, we know that this gap in the lot rents versus the apartment buildings is way too wide. So let's come and buy this park and jack rents immediately. Let's double rents day one, or let's increase them 50%. While in many markets and many investments, you can do that. That's short-term thinking and not what you want to do for sustainable property or for just the industry's reputation. The real opportunity in this space is the ability to do this consistently, to increase lot rents 5-7% really consistently. Maybe, sure, you have to do a little bit higher year one, like low double teens, to get it closer to reality so you can afford the maintenance of the property. But the real opportunity is knowing what your future demand and revenue increases look like. And you can do that for a very long period of time, which is completely rare in commercial real estate. Almost every other real estate asset class, the rents fluctuate, right? Year to year based on what the economy is doing, what demand looks like, what new supply is coming on. Whereas here, the opportunity is just to be able to sustainably and predictably, in a lot of markets, in most markets, increase those lot rents over time versus just jacking through the roofs just because you can.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I know that when we got together a couple of weeks ago, Brad, we chatted about that a little bit. In periods of extreme volatility, this particular strategy is really going to pay off because of the durability and the predictability of the cash flows.
Indeed. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about that stretch for affordability and how it does solve problems for some people. And we're seeing this on a national level in terms of migration patterns and where people are moving to and why. And the main driver of that is affordability, not only just in housing, but that's the largest piece of the puzzle. So they are moving from higher cost states with higher taxes into the Sun Belt. And also we like the Mountain West certainly is drawing its share of the populace from larger cities on the coast. And part of this is just a COVID backlash from being in a dense city, highly populated when you couldn't go outside. But most of it, I think, is just this overall dynamic of inflation through the roof, housing costs are through the roof. You're living on top of somebody in many of these markets. Whereas if you can leave the coastal states and then perhaps buy a house that has more space to it, or perhaps move into a mobile home park, you're going to get more space than an apartment or a condo. A lot of people are making that choice today. And so this isn't absolute for vintage. These blue areas are certainly areas of the country that we are focusing on. I, in particular, am a big fan of North Carolina and the Southeast, parts of South Carolina too. Obviously, Texas is booming. I love select markets in the Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin. You can find some great opportunities there. It doesn't really fit in the theme I just covered, but still promising markets. And of course, the mountain states are pretty special places. And that was one of the properties that we did with GSC. GSC is the main driver, the operator there. And we'll talk about it briefly. But this just gives you a sense of where people are migrating to, and in part to escape extremely high housing costs. All right. In addition to the affordability gap, which we'll continue to talk about on this presentation, we just wanted to quickly just remind some of you guys about the structural advantages that play off of that affordability gap that also act as the driver of returns in this space. So if you step back and think about what would you want from an ideal business, you can apply that same framework to real estate. You don't want to have unlimited competition with new supply. You don't want to have weak demand. You don't want to have something that is cyclical that can spike and crater in a major recession. And ideally, you don't want to keep throwing money at a business. You certainly don't want to keep throwing money at a real estate project in order to just maintain status quo, which is what you often see in most of the other asset types. This is especially true of hotel, office, of course, where you have to completely redo the lobby. You have to do tenant improvements and leasing commissions for every new lease that comes in. With mobile home parks, you don't have that. You actually take each of these four metrics, which makes them attractive real estate businesses. And just to touch on that, here is just a couple of aspects of why those four elements lead to compounding returns, right? We touched on the fact that you have prices, you have a little bit of control over your price increases because of that affordability gap we talked about. Once again, you don't do it all at once, but you can raise your lot rent 7% and nobody leaves. I actually can't think of a time when we raised lot rents and somebody that day sent a notice in, or that week sent a notice in and said, hey, I'm moving my home out, or I'm out of this part because of that 7% lot increase. Part of that is because that translates to like a $30, $50 increase. It's not a lot in terms of absolute dollars, but you times that over 200 lots, it starts to really move the needle on your returns on your property. And so the tenant turnover is very low. And that really goes, why is it so low? It's not just because these things are expensive to move. That's why everybody kind of latches on to that thesis that, oh, it's $7,000 to $10,000 to move these homes. That is true, but there are plenty of people that have that amount of money to do that. There are plenty of people that can go get somebody else, another park owner, to pay that for them to move the home. The reason why people are not leaving, mobile homes are not leaving these parks, is because they're getting great value, and it's not like they're going to somehow get 50% cheaper lot rent at some other property. You know, they tend to be very stable assets. And I tend to think of the home is, in a way, the home is your tenant in a great market, because oftentimes the actual family in there, if they do decide to move, instead of going through the hassle of actually hooking it up to a truck and having them tote this thing out of the park with all their stuff flying around, they tend to sell the home to a family member, a friend, cousins, and oftentimes you don't even know about it until the new rent check shows up in a different name. And so compare that to apartment buildings where you're saying 50% turnover every year. The apartment buildings turn over very quickly and frequently. And whenever you turn over a new tenant, you have to clean the carpet, you have to replace the carpet often, repaint many times. And you can see how that capital really starts to add up. And all that takes away from not only your cash flow, but your ability to reinvest back into the property, which enables you to increase rents further down the road, which, you know, is a nice fortuitous cycle that you want to maintain. And it's easier to do that when you don't have high capital expenses as an expensive revenue. And so we talked about why these things are recession resistant. They're not recession proof. I don't like that term. Some people use that term, right? We did see in 2001, there was a spike in vacancy for some parks, especially in the Midwest, because there was a couple Wall Street firms that came in and really just tried to press leverage on everything. And they were buying brand new homes for everybody and giving them to whoever had a pulse. It was really the canary in the coal mine for the subprime crisis in stick-built housing. So you have to have a good, solid market. You can't just go anywhere in the country and think that, oh, this is in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, and it's going to be a recession-resistant asset or recession-proof. That's not true. It's got to be in a fundamentally strong market. It doesn't have to be in a boomtown market. That's the nice thing. You just need jobs and incomes to be above a certain threshold, because even if demand is through the roof, affordable housing, people still need an absolute amount of money to be able to afford your lot rent, right? If they don't make enough money, they just can't pay for the lot rent, even if the demand is through the roof. So provided things are stable in most markets, and housing pricing generally is above 200,000 from a median home price, I tend to think most markets do work for this thesis from a recession resistance standpoint. Jake, like, how do you guys think about what types of metrics you guys are just like bright lines for you on the economic side of the equation before you'll entertain going to a market?
I think that we want to see the median price of single family homes above 300K, ideally above 400K. If you look just at the national average, I want to say it's in the range of $420,000 today.
Yeah.
For a single family home. I think value drivers for us, and the reason that residents or prospective home buyers are going to be attracted to your offering is that there's a reasonable spread that exists between what you're offering versus the alternatives, right? And if the cost of a single family home in that market is below 300 grand, even with interest rates higher today, it's really not that much more expensive to go out and buy your traditional stick built structure for 250, 280, et cetera, as compared to what it would cost you to buy a new home in a manufactured housing community today. Because we're a relatively large dealer. We sell between 50 and 70 homes every year, and different markets are different in terms of pricing and costs, but
Sure.
at minimum for your standard multi-section home, your cost out of the factory is going to be $80,000, right?
Sure.
And markets where costs are higher and the housing market is tighter, it's going to be more than $100,000, and that's just to get it from the factory. You got to transport it to site, you got to set it up. So for us, we really want to see that there's enough demand to be able to sell a new home in the community and recover your costs. Not necessarily make a big profit on the sale of the home, but if you're in a market where you can't, fortunately, we've only had one community like that, where the market wasn't strong enough to support the price that you would need in order to recover your cost on the sale of a new manufactured home. And I think that is indicative of the strength of the market. And if you don't have that, I just think it's going to be really difficult for that particular community to thrive in the future.
Yeah, 100%. There is an argument to be made. As long as you can sell a new home, then you can always fix your occupancy. You can always fix the cash flow of the property, provided you have access to capital, which is another thing that I think that newer people can get in trouble in this space, is when they come in thinking that they're compounding machines, they're capital light, but you might have to access capital, float capital, to help you get a brand new home in, to fill a lot, to go in and fix a park-owned home that maybe temporarily becomes on your balance sheet. But you need a lot of working capital. You can't be thinly capitalized in this space. The best operators that I have seen in the space have access to a ton of capital, either through their investor base, credit facilities, a fund that they raised, their own personal wealth, in order to fix those problems. So I agree with you. As long as the median home prices are above a certain level and incomes are above a certain level, you always know that you can sell homes, which is really how you reduce risk in this space. There's a lot of numbers on this page, but it just goes back to the recession resistant dynamic in this space. And if you can see the downturns here and how NOI growth for the largest operators in the space, how that played out, you can see it's pretty predictable, right? We had two perfect storms for real estate crises in 2008 and 9, and then COVID, of course, and manufactured housing, the nicer, markets and properties. We're not talking trailer parks here. They came out not only just fine, but thrived, which supports everything that we're talking about today. And it all comes down to that, once again, that affordability gap and those structural advantages of the space. All right. So just talking about some actual deals and how what we've touched on relates to actual properties. We've kind of alluded to it on this presentation so far. This is Jake's deal in Montana that we are a part of. Jake, you want to just give us a quick overview of this asset, why you like it, how the housing affordability dynamic works in this market?
Yeah. So I think there's been an evolution in that has certainly picked up pace since COVID as it relates to the population growth as well as the migration of new residents to places like Montana. We certainly, if you're living on the West Coast, I'm in the Seattle, Washington area myself, but Seattle, Oregon, California, been a large departure for a variety of reasons into more open air spaces, like you'd mentioned, Brad, similar to North Carolina. Idaho and Montana have been enormous beneficiaries of that from a population growth standpoint. It's been great for the local economies, but it has also, the markets have just seen so much demand and they weren't necessarily equipped to provide the supply that was necessary. And so those housing markets have been pinched a little bit in terms of the availability and opportunity for folks to find reasonably priced housing. And it's also in the state of Montana in particular, it's relatively expensive. The land is relatively expensive for a variety of reasons, minerals and really just the materials themselves. It makes it very expensive to build in that region. So they've had some barriers that have presented challenges as it relates to providing the amount of housing that's needed. And a housing crisis like that it's not specific to Montana. I think that we're really seeing this nationwide, but there are certain areas that have seen a bigger pinch than others. And Idaho and Montana are two of those areas. And with this particular community, the family developed it. Grandpa McHugh started his endeavor in the late 60s. He was a land developer himself. So you go back to the 60s and 70s in Montana, there wasn't a Lennar or a Pulte or something like that, Toll Brothers, et cetera, that was building out large subdivisions. And so if you wanted a home, in particular, if you wanted a new home, what most folks were doing is that they were going to the bank, they were getting a construction loan, they were buying a parcel somewhere, and it made it very convenient for them if that parcel had already been developed, meaning that it had been graded, all the utilities had been run into it, et cetera. Some people might refer to that as a paper lot. And so that's really what Grandpa McHugh did, is he built out finished lots or paper lots and then would sell them off. And it was good business. But what he loved about the manufactured housing community is that those revenues were recurring. Whereas if he built out a lot and sold it, he just had to move to the next one. He wasn't going to receive anything from that lot after he sold it. He wasn't a home builder. And that's why manufactured suited him so, is that he could develop the finished lots, but he wasn't a guy who was putting up the frame and trusses. He wasn't a home builder.
Sure.
And so as he accrued additional dollars that he was able to invest, he built out the community in phases. The last phase, roughly 45 lots, was put in the late 90s. And so today it's 278 lots. There's one very small lot that's not occupied. So we have one unoccupied lot, but it's suffice to say that those 277 lots have been occupied for going on probably 3 decades now, since the late 90s or thereabouts. So you just think about the economic cycles that we've gone through in the US, in particular the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, I was working almost exclusively in apartments and asset managing, acquiring, divesting a large volume of Class A, Class B apartments. And I remember that time when the recession hit, and we went from being 95% occupied to being 70% occupied in what felt like a weekend. And that not only changed the income equation in terms of our occupancy, but it also changed our income as it relates to what we were then leasing new units at, because all the pricing reset. So if we were charging $1,500 for a 1-bedroom, all of a sudden we were charging $1,150 to get it leased.
Yeah, it's a death spiral.
Yeah, so it was interesting times, and it's such a great case study relative to manufactured housing, because I can promise you that Grandpa McHugh, he may not have been able to increase his rates, but he didn't go backwards. And yeah, maybe he lost a couple of tenants, but he didn't go from 100% to 70% overnight.
Yeah.
And
And that's one of
so,
my favorite things to do is looking at Google Earth, the aerial view, and you can go back in time and you can look at a park and you can look, okay, how is the occupancy done in tough periods? Right? And there's plenty of parks that just remain 100% occupied through various difficult real estate markets. There's some in softer markets that certainly saw that dynamic that I touched on, where they brought in a bunch of brand new homes in 1999, and then by 2001, the bank was foreclosing on some. But you want to avoid those types of markets that are more boom and bust, right? The assets and the markets that we look at, we like to see that consistency where you're not seeing occupancy go crazy, 10 to 20% every few years. It just looks like the same thing every year on this aerial, except you can see the weather changes, right?
the other thing that's really unique about this particular property is because of their background and their professional expertise, they did an incredible job maintaining the property. I mentioned earlier that it was built out in phases, with the last phase going in the late 90s. You can't tell. I've been in other communities where they built it out in two phases, and it is
It
so
looks silly, yeah.
obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's immediately obvious to the naked eye. Whoa, this is a world of difference.
Yeah, and then you can say it's in the old park, old side of the park. They're like, "Oh, we want to move to the new one." And there's an opening. You're like, "No, we want new tenants coming in. We don't want to just swap."
Yeah, so they did an incredible job. They're very hands-on. You mentioned down here on the utilities that it's city water plus well and city sewer. It's just another example of how their craftsmanship and their professional expertise was used to benefit the property. So the family built out a series of 8 wells. Grandpa McHugh also developed a subdivision that's immediately across the street, as well as the golf course. And he lived in that subdivision across the street. Now, he didn't build the homes, but he built out a subdivision, finished the lots, and then sold off the lots one by one, built his own home there in the community, and lived across the street and managed the park until his death. And at that point, his grandchildren took on the operations, continued to do a great job. And it was getting to a point where the grandchildren were getting ready to retire. And this is one of the rare instances, I think, like within affordable housing, and this is a bit of a segue, but Brad, how many owners have you talked to? I've talked to a lot who always say, hey, we really matters who we sell to. We want to make sure that we sell to someone who's going to take care of the property, take care of the residents. And then as the process unfolds, that whole thesis breaks down, and it's just who is willing to pay the most. And oftentimes the folks that are willing to pay the most tend to be the ones who may not be that sincere about taking care of the park in the same way the family did, and taking care of the residents in the same way the family did. And so this is truly one of very few circumstances where our reputation in terms of being a responsible owner and operator really helped us. And I know for a fact that the property owner turned down offers that were not just higher than ours, but like higher than ours by a couple $1,000,000.
It's wild.
And the reason for that is that their grandchildren, who still carry the family name McHugh, live down the street, right? They're not going to be able to get away from this. And it's great to know that there are people out there like that. It was great that we were able to capitalize on the reputation that we've built within the industry. And it was a great opportunity from the standpoint that on a price per pad basis, right, we were buying into a really well-maintained community in a good part of town, in a good market, for less than $100,000 a pad, which in the Western US is very difficult to do.
It's hard to find.
Very hard to find. And one other little tidbit about Grandpa McHugh, one of his deals, for lack of a better term, was that for 20 straight years, he only increased the lot rent $5 a year. There's some upside from a business standpoint, from a financial standpoint, economic standpoint. Not only do we feel good about our cost basis in terms of cost per pad, but we didn't buy into a community that had lot rents that were already at the very top of the market, right? With not a lot of room to move. That doesn't mean that we're going to capitalize on the entire delta that exists in terms of room to move.
Sure.
Immediately. But what it does is it sets us up, just as you said, Brad, where we know that we're going to be able to achieve increases in our income of 5 to 7% every single year for an extended period of time without doing significant damage to the financial wherewithal of the existing residents. So there's still going to be value there for the residents. Meanwhile, we're obtaining a really well-maintained asset that is going to endure the test of time, that will allow us to very predictably achieve strong income growth, right? So
Yeah, that's the best part. These are my favorite type of deals because you don't have to do anything heroic here.
Yeah.
And you don't have to take the risk of ending up in the front page of the newspaper because you doubled lot rents on everybody because you were the 20th highest bid in a private equity auction. Right. So if you want to shoot for 20 IRRs in this space, 25, 30, which look, you can get here and there if you get lucky on the purchase price. But if that's what you're shooting for, you better be looking at some heavy infill or some sort of unique structure or hair on the deal. If you're more looking for kind of reliable returns with lower risk on the downside in a great looking park and market, it's tough to beat this profile. So this is a great deal we're thrilled to be a part of with you guys. And so I completely agree with you about the profile of the greatest generation, grandpa that built the park. I've sat at many dinner tables with such men, and usually their son will show up too because he's decided, do I want to take it over or just cash the check? And you're absolutely right. It's a lot of it, a handshake and great, fine, send me the contract, but I want you to look me in the eye and tell me that you're going to perform or you're going to take care of this property, because they almost feel like the mayor of the property because they've been mowing the grass themselves for 30 years. They have their office or a home in the property. They know all the tenants and they like that role. And some of them even have a hard time retiring from that role post sale. I've had several owners that want to continue working in the park just for free or even $500 a month so they can stay involved and stay around their tenants, which is a weird dynamic. You don't often see that in too many other industries.
Funny you mentioned that, because the gentleman who was running the property, one of the grandchildren of Grandpa McHugh, he wanted to stay on for 3 months post close. And it was awkward in certain respects. Great guy, super easy to get along with. I just felt bad dictating his schedule. That wasn't the relationship that we had up to that point, right? And in fact, he volunteered his time. Helena got just crushed with winter weather these last 2 weeks. We had an asset management call earlier this week, and our property manager was in the office. It was -20, and they got 4 feet of snow last week.
Oh,
and the seller came down to help with snow plowing, just totally on his own. Came down, volunteered his time to help with snow plowing.
Yeah, no, they're wired differently. I tell you, I know plenty of people that it's like they sell something and it's straight to Bahamas, right? I never want to hear or think about it again.
100%.
But the pops that live in the market, that's their baby.
Yep.
And funny enough, that's the exact same story with this one. This was my deal in a different investment entity, bought in 2016. And speaking of freezing, 20 below, this is in Duluth, Minnesota, MSA, technically Superior, Wisconsin. It's right on the border of those two states, right by the lake there. And if you could see, this thing is right next to a Walmart, which was my favorite part of the deal when I was analyzing. I was like, okay, I'm guaranteed to have great demand here. That's a hell of a convenience for a lot of these families. And this was bought from same profile as Grandpa McHugh's. He built the park 30 plus years ago with his son. He had an office in the park. He did all the mowing. You're just quintessential buying from a mom and pop operator here. All right, yeah, this one I wanted to show some stats just to give you a sense of that you don't need to, once again, do crazy lot rent increases. You don't even need to do crazy infill on some of these parks or have cap rate compression to really move the needle on your NOI and then ultimately your sale. And this is especially true when you're buying from a pop profile because they just don't have the same incentive to dial every expense and every revenue line item at these properties because they tend to have no debt on the property. They tend to have no investors. They're not professional operators. They're doing a great job because they care, but they just don't have the same incentives as you might. They weirdly have an incentive to keep expenses high because they don't want to. They've run through their depreciation schedule and they don't like paying the tax bills after years of not having to pay taxes because of the depreciation. So you can do a lot of things with a mobile home park to increase NOI and drive returns without having to do a lot of the things that people are knocking mobile home parks. There's plenty of people that'll be like, the secret's out, that it's very nice to be able to buy these things 15 years ago, but you just can't drive returns today. You can't move NOI, and you can't get the big sales multiple at the end on cap rate compression. And my argument is that you don't absolutely need it, and you shouldn't be underwriting it anyway. You want to buy an asset that you're confident you can hit an acceptable return by doing pretty basic things without having to rely on the kindness of capital markets to bail out your returns on the ultimate sale. And this is one of those deals. We increased occupancy a little bit. We passed through the water. That was a huge deal, but it was totally acceptable and common in that marketplace, and nobody blinked when we did it. It was off market, so we got it at a good basis. The lot rent, we moved, but we didn't move it a ton over 5 years. Really, it was just more, again, passing through the water, which was a big expense, increasing some light infill of some new homes. We added a fair amount of RVs. We actually marketed the self-storage was on the property. So we just did things to optimize the property versus what popped, and was able to get a great outcome, 4x multiples, 5+ IRR. And this one, just real quick, similar profile. I like showing this one just because it also gives you an example of, once again, you didn't have to do something heroic here on lot rent. And cap rate, going in cap rate, people over fixate on in this space because maybe they're coming from the apartment world and they're used to things being more efficient. So if you're buying an apartment from a professional operator, it's unlikely that there's going to be some giant expenses or inefficiencies that's keeping that lot rent or that cap rate artificially low. Whereas you see it all the time in mobile home park loan, where something that looks like a 3 cap, if you really dig into it, your P&L, your team, and what you're going to spend and what you can do with that property, the cap rate to me is almost meaningless. Right? It's really for the lenders and the amateurs in the space, because what you should care about is what you can do with that cap rate year one, provided that you're not making, once again, heroic assumptions about infill and giant lot rent increases. So, and that was the case here, right? We got a park in Wichita. It was actually a portfolio of 3 parks. From same story, grandpa built it, son inherited it. This was his giant retirement plan. He did not want to stick around. He definitely went straight to Mexico after, but took care of the asset, was the mayor of this town, really liked enforcing the rules and keeping the park tidy. And we just picked up where he left off and put in our systems in place and improved the NOI, ultimately get a very similar outcome to the last deal. So those are 3 examples of off-market deals where you're buying from pop. Not every deal will be like that. There's plenty of deals that are going to make sense buying from another professional operator. This is especially true right now because I think there were people that maybe got into the space before they had the team and the capital to really turn around deals, and they might need some help here in the next coming years. But this is often a similar profile of the type of deal that you can come across buying off market from the family that built the actual park. I don't know, Jake. I don't know if there's something you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover on the affordable side of this equation.
No, I mean, I think that more than anything else, what we want to reinforce as it relates to the properties that we're operating is that we really do view our communities as today's starter homes. Starter homes today have basically gone away, and it's a little different when you have a senior community. You're not really talking about starter homes, but with your all age or your family communities, it's very important to us that the families that are coming in feel like they're making a safe investment and that this can be a real stepping stone for them. It's not an apartment that they're going to get trapped in forever, that they can't afford to leave or move on from. There's a lot of information that we put together over the years that provides prospective buyers and provides our renters with information, not our renters, but our investors, information that illustrates, hey, not only is there a theoretical cash savings, now what they do with that cash savings is up to them, but let's just assume that they're taking that cash savings every month and putting it into a savings account. And then they're also receiving some appreciation. We can't promise them the moon. We can't promise them that the value of the home is going to double in a short period of time. But like other residences, over time, it does appreciate, and that is equity and savings that you can bank on to be able to take the next step in your life. And I've personally been approached by residents in our properties that have come up, don't even know how they knew who I was. I honestly didn't know who they were. Maybe shame on me, but they came up and thanked me and said, because of the investment that you guys have made in this property, the value of my home has increased so much that my family and I are going to be able to use that as a down payment on a single family home. And I never thought that we'd be in a position to own a home where we own the land underneath us. I think that's, yeah, it's very meaningful. There's an economic return, but in certain instances, there's also an emotional return. And it's important, especially today, given the lack of housing and affordable housing that's available, that we're giving people those opportunities.
That's well said. And I think it's pretty powerful when an operator can come in with a capital budget and the skill set and team to actually do those projects in a relatively short amount of time to improve the overall appearance and value of the park, and then also the value of the homes for those tenants. Because a lot of owners that have owned it for 30 years, all that equity is trapped in the asset, and it's not like they're fabulously wealthy that they can immediately do a $400,000 redo the road project. A lot of these people, that's their only income is the cash flow from the asset. And sometimes they can't afford to do the capital project. So a lot of these properties do need to switch hands, and will continue to do so as the consolidation continues to happen from amateur operators, one-off operators, into more professional large firms. It's nice that there's operators like you guys out there that are doing it in a sustainable way with the end customer in mind, and not just the end returns. Everybody can win in this space, which is what I love about it when done right. Feel free to shoot us an email if you do have questions, info@, vintage-funds.com. Yeah, once again, just want to thank Jake from GSC Investments for taking the time out of his busy schedule. He's got a portfolio to run. And so it was nice of him to join us and talk mobile home parks, which I always like to do. Thanks again, Jake, for joining us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys. Thanks for your time, and we will be in touch shortly, I'm sure. Take care.